What's going on, guys? It's Keefe. In this video, I want to talk to you about freedom and how society attempts to take your freedom and make you its slave. I also want to talk to you about how you can avoid this and the ways in which society attempts to take your freedom from you. I want to go ahead and get straight into this video because it's a real deep dive, so I'm going to skip the intro. But if you do believe that freedom is something worth fighting for, go ahead and hit the like button so we can take this video viral so that more people can get this information. Now, let's get straight into it. So, guys, it is incredibly important to be free in order to live a fulfilling, creative, and happy life. Yet our society is increasingly opposed to individual freedom and is in more favor of something called the greater good. It's not always said the greater good, but that's really the point. It's this idea that you should sacrifice for the good of all. And we get this idea, I think, in our heads because we're packed into cities for the most part. And living in a city, you get this idea in your head that your life really isn't your own. You're always stopped at a stoplight waiting for someone else to go. You're packed in these apartments. You got to be quiet because you got to respect your neighbors. We just like all these different concessions we give because we're so packed in with each other in these tiny little cities. And so we start to think that, it's just totally natural to give up our freedom for the betterment of others. And you might think this is a good thing. You might be sitting there thinking, hey, the greater good, don't be selfish. Let's make everybody happy. But in this video, to start off, I want to explain why the greater good is not actually the greater good. And the first point I want to make about this is, well, who says what the greater good is to begin with? It's kind of funny that the greater good is this collective idea, but an individual tells you what the greater good is. And oftentimes the greater good is broken down to basically everybody can survive. That's kind of the idea, right? This is like redistribute the wealth or make everybody do all these different concessions so that everybody else can survive and all these different ideas. But I would argue, what makes you think that survival is actually the greater good? And this isn't to say, people should die, but what if the greater good was actually for you to have your own personal freedom and to express yourself fully in this life and achieve your own potential? But you cannot do that if other people are going to be controlling you and telling you what you can do with your life, what job you can have, how much money you can have, the decisions you're allowed to make, the content you're allowed to watch. You can't be who you were meant to be if you're completely controlled. You have to be free to experience that. And you'll see that all the great things in your life, they were given to you by other people who were free, right? Look at Elon Musk. What if Elon Musk wasn't allowed to be free to create electric cars and he created PayPal and he's going to Mars? What if he wasn't free to do this because he was controlled for the greater good and we decided Elon Musk was better served doing something else? Or even Jeff Bezos, if he hadn't been able to create Amazon and make all these products available at your doorstep in a day. You don't even have to leave the house, right? That's pretty nice. He was free, so he was able to do that for you. If he'd been controlled for the greater good, then he probably wouldn't have been doing that. Freedom creates things. Control does not. You have to be free in order to create. So that's the first thing against the greater good. The other thing about the greater good is, have you noticed that every time somebody starts talking about, hey, the greater good, you got to give up this freedom for the greater good, it always involves you doing what they want you to do because apparently they know what the greater good is more than you do. And if a politician's talking about it, it always involves them getting more power. So at the end of the day, the greater good is really just a cover for people's power plays. This is a Nietzschean idea. Nietzsche said, the philosopher Nietzsche, he said that most morality was just cowardice. People are actually just cowards and they don't want to admit that, so they claim to be moral. They claim to be nice people, right? If you've ever been in this situation, I did this when I was a kid. You're on the schoolyard and maybe somebody tries to pick a fight with you and you're scared to get into the fight, but you don't want to admit that you were scared and you pushed out of the fight or whatever. So what do? You always make some justification for why you didn't want to get in the fight. Oh man, that's stupid. I'm not going to fight over that. That's so dumb. I'm better than that. But in your mind, you were just scared you're going to get your ass kicked. This is what humans do. We don't want to admit to our weaknesses or to the evil intentions within us. We don't want to admit that we're just power hungry, so we tell you it's for your greater good and it's for your protection and we really care about you and all these different things. But just look at people. Do you think people really are that virtuous? We're not that virtuous. We tend to be pretty selfish and pretty much aiming at power and control, and we're very driven by resentment and all these things. So be very leery of anyone who says they're doing something for your best interest. Another example of this, think about Gavin Newsom. He's the governor of California, right? He's had the whole state locked down. I don't even think gyms have opened up in all of 2020 just about. And why does he do this? Well, it's the greater good. We got to stop the COVID thing. But then they catch him on camera going into a restaurant with no mask on and not socially distancing and having a party. So these people don't even listen to their own rules. So do you really think it was about the greater good, or was it about the fact that he could control you and use this power over you? So you see the danger of the greater good, sacrificing your freedom for the greater good. It's either a power play, or oftentimes the greater good robs you of your true greater good, which is for you to be all you can be in the world and be as free as possible. And in you being as free as possible, you can give more to the world, and therefore the greater good of all is lifted up through you being everything that you could be. Now, the next thing I want to do is talk to you about 3 of the main ways that people try to take your freedom from you. Now, this is not an all-encompassing list, but these are the 3 that I think are really important. They're the ones that really came to mind. And the first one is they dumb you down. Think about public school. Does the public school system teach you how to invest your money in assets so that you can increase your wealth? Does it teach you money management? You know, in order to be free in the world, you kind of got to have money. You're not exactly a free man if you can't quit that job that you hate with all your being because you will go broke and lose your house. That's not called being free, okay? Does the system teach you to be free financially? No. Does the system teach you to think critically? No. People are very dumbed down. They don't have the information, and if you don't have the information, then you just listen to what experts tell you to do, and experts have agendas. A couple big examples of this. One, don't people always say buy a house because it's a really smart investment because it'll appreciate in value? Well, I was a real estate agent, and I'm here to tell you that's not true, okay? A house is actually usually a liability in most cases because it doesn't produce cash flow consistently, and also when you factor in property taxes and annual upkeep expenses to keep the property up, you end up going in the red, and that doesn't even factor in real estate agent expenses when you go to resell the property. So unless you really pick a smart area to buy a house in and you just happen to get lucky on it, a house is actually a bad investment. But banks get a lot of money out of these loans that you keep taking out of the bank to buy the house. Okay, so you're constantly under control. You're giving up your freedom in that aspect. Another good example when it comes to the COVID deaths, okay? There was a CDC study. This is no bullshit. A CDC study that said that only 6% of the COVID deaths were actually directly caused by COVID. The other 94% of them were comorbidity. That means that these people had COVID, but they also died because they had stage 4 cancer or heart disease and all these different things. Okay, this is just a fact. This is not some right-wing conspiracy. It's just a fact. You can look it up on the CDC's website. They did this in the fall. Okay, this is just information, but does anybody tell you this? No, because they want to control you, because if you don't have the information, then you can't make an informed decision. So what you need to do is take responsibility for your own mind, stop relying on experts, take your freedom back, and make the right decisions about what is the truth, because then you can't be controlled. The second way people try to take your freedom from you is by using fear to control you. People are incredibly malleable when they're afraid. Their rationale goes completely to shit, and they just start making impulse decisions because they want the fear to go away. I want you to guess, what do you think the most common word spoken by somebody who's about to be in a plane crash is? The answer is mom. They say mom, okay? They're like screaming like mom, like when they're about to die. Now, why do you think that is? Well, what does a mom represent? It represents safety. It represents this nurturing figure that really cares about you. So the idea behind that would be to say that when you're afraid, what do you want? You want someone to take care of you and make the pain go away. You want to be brought back into that loving space. So what do people do? They make you scared, and then they tell you the solution to your fear, to make the fear go away, to make the bad man go away, the boogeyman stop, is to give us the control. We'll take care of this situation for you and everything will be just fine. And what do people do? They line up and do it. I'll use the pandemic as a good example again, since this is something that's really on everybody's mind, but there's a lot of people who are living in fear of this virus. They're completely terrified of it. So what are they going to do? They're going to act irrationally. They're not going to talk about that CDC study I mentioned. They're going to try and use this fear to make everybody do what they want them to do because they just want their own personal fear to go away. And so they're going to try and control everybody else, and they're going to justify it through the greater good again. Now, the key to avoiding this situation is you have to get in control of yourself. You got to be aware of when fear is driving you and not let it be in control. You got to understand that you are naturally irrational when you're afraid. It's a biological thing. When the lion is attacking you, there's no time to rationally deduce the best decision to make. You just run, right? You just react, okay? So when you're in fear, your rational mind goes, well, you got to know this. So you got to be aware of what state you're making a decision from. The other really important part of this is, since you know that you're irrational when you're afraid, go get the rational information so that you can make a clearer decision. So these two really tie together. You need to be informed in order to not be afraid. Last one I want to cover is social pressure. People's desire to conform will cause them to sacrifice their freedom. Another example from the pandemic, I think, is the masks. This might just be my biased opinion, to be honest, but I really think the breakdown on masks tends to go something like this. It's like 30% of people actually really care about the masks and want to wear them. About 20% of people are completely opposed to the masks, and about 50% of people really just want to be left alone and get along with everybody, so they wear the masks. But in all honesty, they don't want to. They just want to fit in with the crowd. You see what I'm saying there? And this is just something that tends to happen in a lot of situations. Usually you'll find that there's a strong group of people who are very for something, a lot of people who are very opposed to it, but the biggest group is pretty indifferent to it and kind of just goes with the breeze on most things. Another example of this is something like a standing ovation. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody gave a speech or a movie finished and everybody stands up and applauds, and you just get caught up in it and you start standing and applauding? I'll tell you, one time this happened to me. This guy, he gave this speech and it was just truly mediocre at best. I mean, honestly, worse than mediocre. It was pretty trash. And everybody stood up and applauded this man for some reason. And I gotta be honest, I caved to weakness in this moment. And we all sin, right? I stood up and I applauded. And I remember feeling like, God, why am I standing up right now? This guy's not even any good. So what you gotta understand from this is you gotta stop giving your power over to the group. Because if you keep giving the group power over you, you'll give up your freedom. You have to learn that the group really doesn't matter, and you have to stand on your own deeply held beliefs, which again is why it is so important to be informed, right? And also to not be living in fear, because then the group will control you, because you want to stay safe with the group. It's kind of like how fish, they swim in the big school because it makes them look like one giant fish against the shark, but if they're swimming alone, they get scared. That's kind of how people act in this herd mentality, right? They just start staying together to stay safe, right? So if you're not afraid and you're informed, it's a lot easier to go against the crowd. The last thing I want to say on this video, guys, is that this is not about being a dick. A lot of times people think, oh, you just won't do what everybody wants you to do, so you're being a dick. And that's not true. In fact, you're the dick if you're trying to make me do something against my will just because you're scared or you want everybody to get along with you, whatever it is. You're the real dick, not me, just because I want my own personal freedom. This is about having the right over your own life, okay? And we live in a world where this is getting treated like it's irrelevant, like you don't own your own life, that you're a slave to society and you have to do what everybody wants. And I'm just completely opposed to that in all ways. This also doesn't mean be completely selfish, right? During World War II, we had to ration food so that the troops on the front lines had enough food to eat during the battle. And you know what? I'm all for that. Hey, we got to help the troops who are fighting to protect our freedom. I'm totally down to make sure that happens. And I just won't stuff my face all day. Like, that's totally reasonable. But it's not about mandating people to do whatever you want them to do just so that you don't have to feel afraid or you can control them, whatever it is. That's the whole point. Now, I also want to give a shout out to Academy of Ideas for the idea for this video. They had a really awesome video, and if you want to check that video out, you can click the link in the description box below. And if you got something out of this video, give me a like and hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.